He had always been a quiet man, the kind of person who moved through life without making waves. People in his neighborhood barely noticed him beyond a nod or a polite smile. He didn't seek attention and he didn't invite trouble. But behind that calm exterior was a life most would never imagine. A past he had buried deep, locked away like a shadow that could never quite be chased into the light. For years he had tried to leave that life behind, to live simply, to enjoy the small, ordinary pleasures that most people took for granted. He cherished mornings with his wife, the soft sound of her voice as she brewed coffee, the way her hair fell across her face when she laughed. She had a warmth about her that made every worry seem lighter, every dark memory a little less heavy. Their home was modest but filled with love. Plants on the windowsill, photos of trips they had taken, and little reminders of shared moments tucked into every corner. He often thought that this was all he wanted, a life unremarkable by the world's standards yet perfect in its own quiet way. On that particular day, he had decided to run an errand with her. It was nothing unusual. They were stopping at a gas station to fill up the car and grab a few snacks. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, and there was a calmness in the air that made everything feel ordinary, almost peaceful. She held his hand as they walked toward the pumps, laughing about a silly mistake she had made earlier in the week. He smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes, feeling a warmth spread through him at her laughter. The gas station was quiet when they arrived. Only a few cars were scattered across the lot, and the cashier waved cheerfully as they entered. He noticed small things as he always did, the way the wind shifted the sign by the entrance, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, the distant rumble of a car engine on the main road. These little details comforted him, reminded him that life could still be simple, safe and predictable. Then, without warning, everything changed. A group of police cars roared into the lot, lights flashing, tires squealing, their presence jarring and sudden. His heart skipped a beat, confusion and fear intertwining as he instinctively shielded his wife. He could see the panic in her eyes mirrored by his own. They had done nothing wrong. They weren't involved in anything. And yet, there was a tension in the air that was palpable, something charged and dangerous that he could feel in his bones. He tried to reason with the officers, raising his hands to show he posed no threat. His voice was calm but firm, pleading for clarity. "We're not doing anything wrong. Please, just tell us what's happening." But his words were drowned out by shouting, commands, and the overwhelming chaos that erupted around them. In a moment that seemed to stretch forever, a gunshot rang out. It was loud, sharp, and final, cutting through the air like a knife. Time slowed. His wife's body went rigid, her eyes wide with shock. She stumbled forward and instinct took over. He caught her in his arms, cradling her as she trembled, and the world seemed to narrow to the two of them, the space around them collapsing into a blur of sirens, shouts, and flashing lights. "No, no, she's not, please." His voice cracked, raw with terror and disbelief. He pressed her close, willing her to be okay, but the warmth that had always radiated from her began to fade. Panic surged through him, threatening to consume the calm he had worked so hard to maintain all these years. People around them froze, some screaming, some ducking behind cars, others pulling out their phones to record the horror. He didn't notice any of it. All he could feel was the weight of her in his arms, the fragile life that seemed to hang by a thread, and the sudden, unbearable fear that he had lost everything he loved. As he looked into her eyes, he felt a spark ignite deep within him, a spark that was not fear, not grief, but something darker, sharper, honed by years he had tried to forget. He had survived things most people couldn't even imagine, endured missions and battles that had left scars invisible to the world, and now that past which he had hidden so carefully, stirred awake with a clarity and precision he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. But in that first moment, all he could do was hold her, whispering words of comfort he barely believed himself. "Stay with me. Please, stay with me. Don't leave me." He rocked her gently, willing her heart to keep beating, willing the world to stop spinning so fast. Around them, chaos continued, but for him, everything else had ceased. The officers were shouting now, some telling him to drop her, others calling for medics. He looked at them, truly looked, and saw the confusion and fear in their eyes, the hesitation. They did not know who they were dealing with. They had no idea what they had stepped into. And that ignorance, for the briefest moment, gave him a sense of control in a situation that felt otherwise uncontrollable. His mind raced, moving faster than he had allowed in years. He assessed, calculated, measured every possibility, every outcome. He knew instinctively what had gone wrong, why the situation had escalated so quickly. But right now, those thoughts were secondary to the single burning need to save her. Finally, paramedics arrived, rushing to take her from his arms. He didn't let go easily. Every second felt like an eternity, every movement deliberate and cautious. They assessed her quickly, speaking in low, urgent tones, and then lifted her onto a stretcher. He followed closely, staying beside her, whispering reassurances he wasn't sure he believed. The ride to the hospital was a blur. He held her hand the entire way, refusing to let go, willing her strength to return with every passing mile. He couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened, how quickly normal life had been shattered and how fragile everything really was. A single moment, a single decision, had changed everything. As they arrived at the emergency room, he handed her over to the doctors with trembling hands, watching as they whisked her away. He stayed in the waiting area, a storm of emotions raging inside him. Grief, fear, and disbelief battled against the controlled, strategic part of his mind, the part that remembered how to survive, how to act when all hope seemed lost. He sat there, quiet, unmoving, lost in thought. No one could see the depth of the storm inside him, the way his past and present collided in that hospital waiting room. He remembered missions, fights, and losses from years ago, flashes of a life he had tried desperately to leave behind. And he realized with a chilling clarity that some parts of that life never left. They were dormant, yes, hidden beneath layers of calm, but they were always there, waiting for a moment like this to awaken. The hours stretched on, each tick of the clock amplifying his anxiety. Nurses came and went. Doctors whispered amongst themselves, and the world outside the hospital continued without pause. But for him, time had stopped. Every sound, every movement, every breath was focused solely on her. She was his anchor, his reason, the part of his life that had made everything else worth surviving. And now she was in danger, and he felt powerless in a way he had never allowed himself to feel. Yet deep down, beneath the panic and the grief, a seed of resolve began to grow. He would not let this stand. He would not allow anyone to think they could take her from him, to believe that she was vulnerable in his arms. And even as he sat there waiting for news, he began to plan, not recklessly, not impulsively, but with the sharp, calculating precision that had once been his way of life. The calm, quiet man who had walked through life unnoticed was gone, replaced by someone who had faced death countless times and survived. He didn't know yet how he would act, what steps he would take, or who he might confront, but he knew this. Nothing would ever be the same, and those responsible would come to understand that the man they had underestimated was not just a husband in grief. He was someone forged in fire, trained for situations far worse than this, and now that fire had been reignited. As the night deepened and the hospital grew quieter, he sat alone holding her favorite scarf in his hands, remembering her smile, her laughter, the warmth of her hand in his, and he made a silent promise. No matter what it took, he would protect her and he would see justice done. Nothing else mattered. The world could wait. The chaos could wait. Only she mattered, and in that quiet, tense moment, the man who had hidden his past from everyone, who had lived a life of peace and anonymity, began the long, unyielding journey back into the shadows of who he once was. Not for revenge, not yet, but for the woman who had given him everything worth living for. He would not fail her, not now, not ever. He could not sleep. The hospital room was quiet, almost eerily so except for the steady beeping of the machines that measured her heartbeat. Each pulse reminded him of how fragile life could be, how a single mistake, a single moment could change everything. He sat in the chair beside her bed, leaning forward, hands clasped tightly together, staring at her sleeping form. Her hair was spread across the pillow, her face pale but peaceful, and he found himself staring, memorizing every detail as if trying to keep a part of her with him. It was impossible to stop his mind from wandering back into the past, a past he had worked so hard to leave behind. Years ago, before this quiet life, he had been someone else entirely, a soldier, trained in ways most people could only imagine in nightmares or movies. He had been ruthless, precise, and feared by those who knew of him. Every movement, every decision, every mission had required him to rely on instinct and skill, sometimes leaving nothing but silence and destruction behind. He remembered the first mission that had truly changed him. He had been sent to a foreign land, tasked with tracking a dangerous target. The operation had gone wrong, as many did, and he had lost people he cared about, comrades who had become like family. The weight of their deaths had stayed with him, burning in his chest every day afterward. He had learned to bury that pain beneath layers of discipline and focus, to push it down so deep that no one, not even himself, could reach it, and yet, here he was back in a hospital room, holding on to the one person who mattered more than anyone or anything, and all those memories resurfaced. He could not ignore them. They were part of him as much as the love he felt for her, as much as the grief that now consumed him. He thought about how easily life could be taken away. He had seen death up close many times, and each time it had reminded him that control was an illusion. But now, for the first time in years, he realized that he had a chance to act, to make a difference, to protect the person he loved, and he would not waste it. The hours in the hospital passed slowly, each minute stretching longer than the last. Doctors came in and out, speaking quietly to each other, checking monitors and adjusting medications. Nurses brought water and blankets, offering polite smiles and words of reassurance. He thanked them, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about how this had happened, about the officers who had arrived at the gas station, about the chaos that had erupted so suddenly. Something had gone wrong, and he needed to understand why. He remembered every detail of that moment, the flash of lights, the sound of shouting, the sudden movement, the shot. It played over and over in his mind like a broken recording, and beneath the fear and grief, beneath the sorrow and confusion, a deeper, sharper feeling began to grow. Anger, not the blind, reckless anger of someone untrained, but the cold, focused anger of someone who knew how to act, how to plan, how to strike when the time was right. He knew that his skills could make a difference. He knew that he could find out what had happened, who was responsible, and why. But he also knew that he had to be careful. He could not let grief or rage dictate his actions. Every step had to be calculated, every move precise. That was how he had survived before, and it was the only way he could move forward now. As he sat there, memories came back in flashes. Training in harsh environments, missions in foreign countries, nights spent alone in the dark. Waiting, watching, listening. He remembered the weight of a rifle in his hands, the sound of a target falling, the quiet satisfaction of a mission completed. And he remembered the cost. Friends lost, enemies made. The loneliness that came with being good at something no one else could do. He had left that life behind because he wanted something different. He wanted peace, love, a chance to be human again. And he had found it for a time in the simple joys of a quiet life with his wife. But now that peace had been shattered, and he could feel the old instincts returning, creeping up like shadows from the past. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He had to stay calm. He had to be patient. Acting too quickly without knowing the full picture could make everything worse. But he also knew that time was not on his side. Every hour that passed was an hour that allowed others to cover their tracks, to hide evidence, to escape accountability. He began to think through what he knew. The officers had arrived at the gas station suddenly without warning. Something had triggered them, something they had believed was a threat, but he and his wife had done nothing wrong. He replayed the scene in his mind, step by step, analyzing each movement, each decision, each reaction. He had to understand it fully before he could act. And then he thought about her. Her life depended on his ability to remain focused, to stay sharp, to channel the instincts he had spent years trying to forget. He could not let grief blind him. He could not let fear take control. Every lesson, every skill, every moment of training suddenly had a purpose again. He would use them not for destruction, but for protection, for justice, for her. As the night stretched on, he began to plan. He would start quietly, gathering information, observing those involved, looking for inconsistencies, mistakes, anything that could reveal the truth. He would move carefully, methodically, without drawing attention, and he would wait for the right moment to act. Patience had always been his ally, and it would be now as well. The hospital staff continued their work, unaware of the storm building and the quiet man sitting in the corner. To them he was just a husband, a worried man, a figure of sorrow and grief. They did not know the depth of his experience, the extent of his abilities, the way his mind worked when danger approached. They did not know that beneath the calm, grieving exterior was a man who had survived wars, who had faced death countless times, who knew how to make impossible decisions under pressure. He thought about what he had left behind when he chose this quiet life. He had given up violence, conflict, and power. He had chosen love, simplicity, and peace. But life had a way of reminding him that the past never truly leaves. It waits, it watches, and when the moment comes, it can rise again, unstoppable, demanding action. He did not know yet what he would do, or how far he would go. He only knew one thing with certainty. He would not allow injustice to stand, and he would not allow anyone to harm the person he loved. That knowledge gave him a strange sense of calm amidst the chaos. It was a calm born of experience, of skill, of knowing that he could survive whatever was coming next. Hours later, when the first light of morning began to filter through the hospital windows, he felt a shift. She was stable. The immediate danger had passed, and she was alive. But he also knew that this was only the beginning. The incident at the gas station was a symptom, not the whole story. He would need to uncover what had really happened, why it had happened, and who was responsible. And he would do it in his own way, quietly, carefully, and with the precision that had defined his past. He would move through the shadows, gather information, and prepare for the moment when action became necessary. He would not rush. He would not act recklessly. But when the time came, he would be unstoppable. For now he stayed by her side, watching her sleep, memorizing every detail, holding on to the warmth and life that she represented. He allowed himself a brief moment of peace, knowing that soon the calm would end and the work would begin. But even in that moment he felt a sense of clarity, a sense of purpose. He knew who he was, what he could do, and why it mattered. The quiet man, the grieving husband, the former soldier, all of them were parts of the same person converging in that hospital room. And though the past had been buried for years, it was ready to rise again, guided by love, sharpened by skill, and fueled by a determination that could not be denied. As the morning sun fully rose, casting light across the sterile hospital room, he made a silent promise. He would uncover the truth. He would hold those responsible accountable, and he would protect her, no matter the cost. The man who had once been trained for war was ready to face a new battle, one that was personal, urgent, and unavoidable. And so the quiet hours passed, each one building toward the moment when his skills, his experience, and his love would collide, driving him toward a path that he had thought he had left behind forever. The journey had begun, and there was no turning back. The days after the shooting were a blur of monitors, medications, and whispered updates from doctors and nurses. His wife was stable now, though the wound she had suffered still weighed heavily on him, not just physically but emotionally. Every time he saw her eyes flutter beneath the eyelids, he felt a pang of fear, a reminder of how close he had come to losing her. But with stability came opportunity. He could no longer sit idly waiting for answers. He needed to act. He started quietly, methodically. He visited the gas station multiple times, speaking to employees, customers, anyone who might have seen something unusual. His questions were casual, seemingly harmless, but each word was measured. He watched faces carefully, noting hesitation, contradictions, or small tells that most people would miss. He had trained for years to read subtle signs, to detect deception, and now he relied on every ounce of that skill. It wasn't long before he noticed inconsistencies. The officers' accounts of the events didn't match what the security cameras had captured, and some witnesses remembered details differently than the official report. These discrepancies were small, almost invisible, but to him they were clues, threads he could follow to unravel the truth. He made mental notes, connecting them piece by piece. Every lie, every omission, every hesitation told a story, and he intended to uncover it fully. At home, he spent hours going over every scrap of information he could gather. His wife rested, unaware of the storm that was building quietly around her. He kept it that way intentionally. She needed time to heal, and she needed to feel safe. She could not know the depths of his anger, nor the precise, calculated steps he was planning. It was easier to protect her that way, to keep her shielded from the darkness that his past could bring into their lives. He also reached out discreetly to people from his past, Friends, contacts, people who had known him in his former life. Not openly, not with threats, not with anger, but with precision. He needed information, and there were few who could provide it. Each conversation was a delicate dance, drawing out details without revealing too much of himself. He discovered things he hadn't expected, small pieces of evidence that hinted at corruption, at mistakes made in the heat of the moment, at hidden motives behind the officer's actions. Meanwhile, he trained quietly. Not for combat, not for aggression, but for readiness. Every skill he had learned as a soldier, patience, observation, situational awareness, he refined and sharpened. He knew the importance of being prepared. He could not afford mistakes, not now. Each day, each hour, he honed himself, channeling grief into focus, fear into strategy, and anger into clarity. One evening, as the sun set behind the buildings lining the quiet streets, he returned to the gas station one last time before dark. The lot was nearly empty, and he walked slowly, observing, listening, remembering. The scene that had once erupted into chaos now felt surreal, almost dreamlike. He noted the positions of the pumps, the entrances and exits, the shadows cast by the streetlights. He imagined what had happened from every possible angle, replaying the events over and over in his mind, piecing together the puzzle with methodical precision. It became clear to him that this was not a simple accident. Mistakes had been made, yes, but there was something deeper, something intentional. He could sense it like a faint vibration beneath the surface. Someone had underestimated him, underestimated the consequences of their actions. They didn't know who they were dealing with, and that ignorance would be their undoing. Back at home, he began to map out a plan. Not a plan born of blind rage, but a plan forged in logic, discipline, and the sharp edge of experience. He listed every possibility, every move, every outcome. He considered allies, potential threats, and the weaknesses in each person involved. Nothing was left to chance. Every step would be deliberate, precise, and controlled. He would move quietly, strike subtly, and ensure that justice, in whatever form it took, was achieved. Despite the methodical focus, his emotions were never far from the surface. Every thought of the shooting, every recollection of holding his wife in his arms as she trembled, fueled a fire that refused to be ignored. But he knew that acting purely on emotion would be dangerous. He had learned long ago that even the most skilled soldier could fall when blinded by rage. Strategy had to guide him now, not impulsivity. He started watching patterns, police rotations, shifts, and behavior. Small details, almost invisible to anyone else, gave him insight into their routines, their vulnerabilities. He watched the gas station through discrete cameras he had installed on nearby buildings. He observed interactions, timing, and behavior, recording everything mentally, storing every piece of information like a puzzle piece waiting to be placed. Late at night, he practiced his movements quietly. He walked the streets, learning routes, observing escape paths, noting blind spots and potential hazards. Each step was deliberate, each observation catalogued with precision. His past experience as a soldier had taught him the value of preparation, and now it was paying off in ways he could never have imagined. He also thought about the human element, the psychology of those involved. He considered motivations, fears, and possible mistakes. He understood that people were predictable when pushed, and he planned to use that predictability to uncover the truth. Deception, misdirection, and subtle influence would be his tools, alongside his ability to read people and situations accurately. Meanwhile, the community began to talk about the shooting. Rumors spread, speculation rose, and tensions grew. But he remained in the shadows, quiet, observing, never revealing the depth of his involvement. To the outside world, he was just another man grieving, watching, and waiting. But beneath that exterior, he was something far more dangerous, focused, patient, and relentless. One night, he received a tip from an unexpected source, someone who had witnessed something, but had been too afraid to speak up before. The information was small, almost trivial, but in his hands it became valuable. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. He noted the names, locations, and potential connections, carefully planning his next moves. Each revelation built upon the last, and with every step, he drew closer to understanding the full truth. He also considered potential risks. Acting too soon could alert the wrong people, compromise his position, or endanger others. He knew the value of patience better than anyone. He would wait for the right moment, gather all necessary information, and strike when the time was perfect. The precision of his actions now mirrored the precision of his past missions. No detail was insignificant. No risk was overlooked. Days turned into nights and nights into days. His routine became a mix of observation, analysis, and quiet preparation. Friends and neighbors saw him as a grieving, worried husband, unaware of the meticulous planning unfolding in his mind. His wife, still recovering, remained the center of his world. Every thought, every action was motivated by the desire to protect her, to ensure that no one could ever harm her again. He also began thinking strategically about leverage. Small actions, subtle interventions, and psychological nudges could yield more results than direct confrontation at this stage. He used his knowledge of human behavior to influence people quietly, planting ideas, guiding actions, and observing reactions. It was like a game of chess with each move calculated for maximum impact. By the time a week had passed since the shooting, he had built a comprehensive understanding of the situation. He knew who had been involved, what mistakes had been made, and where the weak points were. The fog of confusion had lifted, replaced by clarity and focus. And with that clarity came the knowledge that action was inevitable. He would not allow this injustice to stand. He would ensure that those responsible faced the consequences of their actions. Yet he also knew that he had to remain careful. Rushing into confrontation could ruin everything he had painstakingly learned. He had survived battles far more dangerous, faced enemies far more skilled, but each required patience, observation, and precise execution. He had no intention of failing now. The stakes were higher than ever, and the cost of mistakes was too great. Every night he returned to her side, checking her condition, holding her hand, speaking softly to her even when she slept. She had no idea of the depths of his planning, the careful surveillance, and the quiet preparations. She only knew that he was there, unwavering, protective, and devoted. And that, in a way, was enough for both of them. He thought about the future, about the confrontation that was coming. He imagined the moments ahead, visualized scenarios, and prepared responses. His mind worked like a machine, each calculation building on the last, each step designed to ensure success. He felt the familiar edge of adrenaline, the kind that had kept him alive in the most dangerous situations imaginable. But now it was channeled with a single purpose: justice for her and for the life that had been shattered in an instant. He knew that when the time came, there would be no hesitation, no second guessing. He would act with the precision, skill, and determination that had defined his past. And when it was over, the truth would be clear, the responsible parties exposed, and the memory of the violence inflicted upon her acknowledged and confronted. But for now, he waited, observed, and prepared. He moved through the world quietly, invisibly, like a shadow slipping unnoticed through a room. Every conversation, every glance, every detail mattered. And with each passing day, he grew more certain that he was ready, that the storm he had been preparing for was finally within reach. He would not fail her. He could not. Nothing else mattered. And in that quiet determination, in that cold, steady focus, he found a strange solace. For the first time since the shooting, he felt in control again. The chaos had not defeated him. The pain had not broken him. And the man who had once been a soldier, a shadow in the world of violence and death, was ready to rise again, not for himself, but for the woman he loved more than life itself. He had waited patiently, observing, planning, and learning everything he could. Each small detail he had collected in the days following the shooting now formed a clear map of the events that had led to that moment. He knew who had been present, who had made mistakes, and who had acted with intent rather than error. The chaos at the gas station had not been random. Someone had underestimated him, and he intended to use that to his advantage. The first move was subtle. He reached out quietly to witnesses, those who had been too afraid to speak up before. He approached them with calmness, not force, not anger, but with careful persuasion. He asked questions that seemed innocent, casual, almost conversational. But each question was designed to extract information, to test reactions, to see if there were cracks in their stories. Some answered reluctantly, some with hesitation, but all provided pieces that he would later fit together. He also began to watch the officers involved more closely. He noted patterns in their movements, habits, and interactions. Every shift, every patrol, every casual conversation was observed and remembered. He saw the fear in some of their eyes, the arrogance in others, and the small mistakes that revealed the truth of what had happened. His experience as a soldier made him notice what others overlooked. He saw behavior, timing, and reactions as clearly as if he were reading a map of intentions. One evening, he discovered something that sent a chill through him. One of the officers had lied in their report, a deliberate misstatement that revealed more than they intended. It wasn't the only lie, and it wasn't the most important, but it was the first real crack in the armor of deception. He realized that the truth was not just hidden in mistakes or confusion, but in intentional concealment. Someone had made a choice to mislead, and that choice would not go unchallenged. He began to move more deliberately, using his skills in observation, analysis, and psychology. He didn't confront anyone yet. He did not need to. Patience had always been his ally, and he would use it now. He watched, waited, and prepared, knowing that the moment to act would come, and when it did, he would strike with precision. He also considered the moral line he would not cross. This was not about vengeance. It was about justice. He would expose the truth, ensure accountability, and protect those who could not protect themselves. His past had taught him that skill without control was dangerous, and he had no intention of letting grief and anger blind him. Every move had to be deliberate, measured, and effective. Days passed. He gathered more evidence, piecing together the events of the shooting with clarity. He realized that the officers had been reckless, perhaps careless, but also that there might be a deeper reason behind their actions. A sense of corruption or cover-up had begun to emerge, small but undeniable, and he knew that if he approached it carefully, he could expose it fully. The opportunity came sooner than he expected. One night he observed two of the officers meeting discreetly in a parking lot near the station. Their conversation was hushed, their movements cautious. He listened, noting the words, the timing, the emphasis. They were planning how to handle witnesses, how to control the narrative, and how to obscure their involvement. This was the proof he needed. The lies, the concealment, the arrogance, all of it was tangible now, and he could act. He did not confront them in anger. That would have been reckless, visible, and unnecessary. Instead, he used the knowledge to influence others quietly, planting information with those who could act legally, strategically, and without exposing him directly. He knew that subtlety was more powerful than force at this stage. He nudged, guided, and observed, ensuring that each piece of evidence would surface at the right time, in the right way. Yet, his presence could not remain entirely hidden. One of the officers began to suspect that someone was watching, that someone was aware of their hidden actions. This created tension, an undercurrent of danger that he navigated carefully. He moved like a shadow, silent, unseen, analyzing the reactions, noting the fear and adjusting his approach accordingly. Every misstep on their part was an opportunity for him to gather more information and strengthen his position. As he prepared for the inevitable confrontation, he also remained attentive to his wife's needs. She was recovering slowly, and while she did not know the full extent of his preparations, she felt his presence, his unwavering support, and his focus. It comforted her, and it reminded him why every action he took had to be precise. He could not afford distraction or failure. Her life and her safety were entwined with the outcome of what he was about to do. The confrontation itself began subtly. One by one, he confronted the inconsistencies, the contradictions, and the hidden truths. He did so with careful calculation, ensuring that he remained undetected while the officers were forced to reveal their own missteps. They were confident, careless, and arrogant, believing themselves untouchable. That arrogance was their weakness, and he exploited it. He started with small exposures, witnesses encouraged to speak, evidence revealed to supervisors, and patterns of behavior documented. Each step was deliberate, each reaction measured. The officer's confidence began to crack. Small mistakes, once invisible, became more visible under his watchful eyes. Fear began to replace arrogance, and hesitation replaced certainty. One night, he took a more direct approach. A meeting had been scheduled among the officers, one that they believed private. He observed from a distance, noting every movement, every gesture, every word. Then he acted indirectly, ensuring that the information reached the right ears at the right moment. The chain of command began to question their actions, and the first real cracks in their facade appeared. The officers started to make mistakes. They contradicted themselves in interviews, left evidence exposed, and argued with each other in ways that revealed more than they intended. Every slip was noted, every misstep cataloged, and he prepared for the final stage. He did not rush. He could not. Timing was crucial, and he had learned long ago that patience often determined victory. Finally, the stage was set for the confrontation that would expose the truth. It was not violent, at least not physically, though the tension was palpable. He presented the evidence in a careful, controlled manner, ensuring that it was undeniable. Witnesses were brought forward, inconsistencies highlighted, and motives questioned. The officers' attempts to cover their actions were revealed for what they were: misguided, reckless, and ultimately unjustifiable. The moment was tense. He watched as the officers struggled to maintain composure, their arrogance replaced by fear and desperation. They realized too late that they had underestimated him, that the quiet man they had ignored, dismissed, and misjudged was far more capable than they could have imagined. The balance of power had shifted and they were powerless to change it. Yet he did not act out of vengeance. His goal had always been clarity, accountability, and justice. He ensured that the process followed legal and ethical paths, that the truth was laid bare without compromising his own integrity. His past had taught him the value of precision, and he applied it now with relentless focus. The resolution came slowly, methodically. One by one, the responsible parties were held accountable, not through violence or chaos, but through the careful gathering of evidence, strategic planning, and unwavering determination. The truth could not be hidden, and it emerged clearly, exposing the recklessness and corruption that had led to the shooting. As the dust settled, he returned home. His wife was still recovering, but she was safe. The danger that had threatened their lives had been addressed, and those responsible had been confronted. He sat beside her, holding her hand, feeling the warmth that had fueled every action, every thought, and every decision since that terrible day at the gas station. He reflected on the journey, the fear, the grief, the careful planning, and the confrontation. He had faced the chaos of his past, channeled it into focus, and achieved justice without losing himself. It was a delicate balance, one that required patience, skill, and control. But it had been possible because of his experience, his love, and his determination. In those quiet moments at home, he realized that the events of the past weeks had changed him. He was still the man who cherished peace and simplicity, but he was also the man who knew that he could not ignore injustice, that he could not allow those he loved to be harmed without action. His past and present had converged, creating a force that was disciplined, precise, and relentless when necessary. He did not seek recognition or praise. The truth was enough. Accountability was enough. And most importantly, his wife's safety and well-being were enough. That was the measure of success, the reason for every calculated step he had taken. As night fell, he sat by her side, watching her sleep. The hospital and chaos had given way to quiet, and the world outside moved on. But he knew that vigilance was still necessary. Life was fragile, unpredictable, and full of hidden dangers. He could not let his guard down completely, not yet. Yet for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of peace. The storm had passed, the immediate danger was addressed, and the truth had emerged. He felt the weight of the past lift slightly, replaced by the clarity that comes from resolution. He had acted with precision, with purpose, and with love. And in doing so, he had protected the one person who mattered more than anything in the world. He leaned back, taking a deep breath, and allowed himself to imagine a future beyond grief and fear. There would be time for healing, for rebuilding, for living. And when that time came, he would be ready, not as a soldier, not as a man defined by past violence, but as someone who had faced the darkness and emerged with clarity, integrity, and unwavering devotion. The weeks that followed the confrontation were filled with quiet reflection. The legal and institutional processes moved slowly, but with the evidence he had meticulously gathered, the truth could no longer be hidden. The officers involved faced inquiries and accountability, and while the world at large barely noticed the quiet reckoning, he felt the weight of justice being restored. The chaos that had threatened to destroy their lives had been confronted, and the balance had shifted. At home, life was slowly returning to a fragile semblance of normal. His wife's recovery was steady, though she still bore the memory of the shooting in the subtle tension of her muscles and the wary way she moved. He stayed by her side, attentive, careful, protective. Every glance, every touch, every whispered word was an affirmation that she was safe, loved, and valued beyond measure. He knew she sensed his vigilance, though she did not fully understand the depth of the storm he had weathered for her sake. That was how it had to be. She could heal, and he could continue to protect her without the shadow of his past looming too heavily over their life. But even in these quieter days, he could not completely rest. His mind, trained for vigilance, continued to analyze and observe. He still reviewed every detail of the incident, imagining ways it might have been prevented, ways to protect others in the future, ways to ensure that what had happened would not repeat itself. This was not obsession, it was caution. It was the result of years spent learning that life was unpredictable, that danger could arrive without warning, and that preparation was the difference between survival and loss. He also thought about his wife in a new light. The events at the gas station had been a jarring reminder of how fragile life could be. She had survived, but he could not ignore the fear and trauma she carried. He approached each day with patience, understanding that recovery was as much emotional as it was physical. He listened when she spoke, offered reassurance when she faltered, and allowed her to express fear and frustration without judgment. He realized that love in moments like these was not just about protection, it was about presence, empathy, and the steady assurance that she was not alone. Even as he nurtured her recovery, he began to consider the larger lessons of what had happened. The shooting, the chaos, and the exposure of misconduct had changed him. He had been forced to reconcile his past as a soldier with his present as a husband and protector. He had been reminded of the power he held, the skills he had honed, and the responsibility that came with both. And he had learned that those skills, when applied with care, patience, and clarity, could serve not just himself but those he loved and even the wider community, in ways that were deliberate and meaningful. One morning, he returned to the gas station, not as a man seeking revenge, but as a man seeking closure. The lot was calm, the pumps gleaming in the sunlight, and the small convenience store hummed with ordinary life. He walked slowly, observing, remembering, letting the memory of that fateful day settle into his mind with the quiet finality of acceptance. This was where it had started, where chaos had erupted, and where his life had been irrevocably altered. But now, standing in the same place, he felt a sense of peace. The danger had passed, the truth had emerged, and he had protected the person he loved most in the world. He did not speak to anyone. He did not need to. The silent acknowledgement of what had happened and what he had done in response was enough. He left the gas station behind, walking back to the car with a sense of purpose and calm. The world had not changed entirely. Bad things could still happen. Mistakes could still be made. But he had faced this challenge, and he had emerged with clarity, strength, and control. At home, he began to rebuild the small routines that had once made life feel safe and ordinary. He cooked meals with her, took walks in the evenings, and engaged in quiet conversations that strengthened their bond. Every laugh, every shared memory, and every simple act of daily life became a reminder that love, patience, and presence could heal wounds, both visible and invisible. He realized that these small moments were as powerful as any skill he had ever learned in his past life as a soldier. They were victories of a different kind, soft, human, and enduring. He also spent time reflecting on the nature of justice. The officers had been held accountable, but he understood that the legal system could only do so much. True justice, he realized, was also about integrity, responsibility, and the willingness to act decisively when the moment demanded it. He had acted not out of revenge but out of necessity and love. That distinction mattered, and it had allowed him to navigate the chaos without losing himself entirely. One evening, as he sat quietly beside his recovering wife, she reached for his hand, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "For staying with me, for protecting me, for everything." He squeezed her hand gently, feeling the weight of the journey they had endured together. "I will always protect you," he replied. Always. It was not a promise born of fear or obligation, but a commitment forged in love, experience, and the knowledge that life was fragile and precious. In the weeks that followed, they began to reclaim a sense of normalcy. They returned to simple routines, to quiet walks, to meals shared without the shadow of fear looming overhead. And while he remained vigilant, always aware of the world around him, he also allowed himself moments of relaxation, of humor, and of connection. He had learned that survival alone was not enough. Living, truly living, required presence, patience, and love. He also began to share small pieces of his past with her, not the most violent or dangerous parts, but enough to help her understand the depth of experience that shaped him. He told her about missions, challenges, and the discipline required to survive, emphasizing lessons learned rather than actions taken. She listened with awe and empathy, gaining insight into the man who had always seemed so quiet, so calm, and so ordinary, but who had endured and survived more than most could imagine. Together they talked about the future. They spoke of travel, of small adventures, of the life they wanted to build beyond fear and danger. The shooting had changed them, yes, but it had also revealed resilience, love, and the capacity to face challenges together. Each conversation, each plan became a reaffirmation of life, of hope, and of the bond they shared. He also reflected on himself. The man who had been a soldier, trained for danger and conflict, had rediscovered another strength: the ability to navigate life with empathy, patience, and wisdom. The balance between vigilance and tenderness, between experience and love, had become his defining feature. He realized that his past, though dark and challenging, had equipped him to protect, guide, and cherish the life he now had. One quiet night, he stepped outside and looked at the stars. The world was vast, unpredictable, and often cruel, yet there was beauty, there was life, and there was love. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for his wife's survival, but for the clarity he had gained, for the understanding of what truly mattered. The shooting, the chaos, and the confrontation had all been part of a journey that tested him, challenged him, and ultimately strengthened him. He returned inside, sitting beside her as she read quietly. He watched the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the calm expression on her face, and he felt a quiet satisfaction. The storm had passed. The truth had emerged. The responsible parties had been confronted. And though life would always carry risks, he had proven that love, vigilance, and careful action could preserve what mattered most. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Recovery continued, both physical and emotional. The couple reestablished routines, embraced new experiences, and allowed themselves moments of joy and peace. He remained vigilant, of course, but he also allowed the world to enter their lives slowly, cautiously, like sunlight warming a space that had been cold for too long. And in those moments of quiet, he realized something profound. Life was unpredictable, fragile, and sometimes cruel, but it was also beautiful, resilient, and worth fighting for. He had faced chaos and emerged with love intact, with justice served, and with a renewed understanding of what truly mattered. The past had shaped him. The events had tested him, but ultimately, they had revealed his strength, his integrity, and his capacity for compassion. He held her hand once more, looking into her eyes with steady focus. "We'll be okay," he said softly, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They would rebuild, they would heal, and they would continue to live fully, aware of the dangers but not defined by them. Life had tested them and they had endured. That was enough. That was everything. And as they sat together, side by side, the world outside moved on. But inside that quiet home there was safety, love, and the enduring promise that no matter what came, they would face it together. The past was behind them. The chaos had been confronted, and the future, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. With courage, patience, and unwavering devotion,